Hello and welcome or welcome back to my Dandelion Diaries. Today I am going to be starting a series in this video about fountain pen beginnings or fountain pen basics, a video for a fountain pen beginner, if you will. And this is going to be a series, so it's going to be broken down into several different videos. If I tried to fit everything that I have learned about fountain pens into one video, we would be here for probably 10 days. So I'm going to just try to break it off into little chunks, and also I will have timestamps in the description for various parts of the video that I'm going to be talking about today. And today's video is going to be all about pens, right? The meat and potatoes of a fountain pen journey, if you will. You got to start with a pen before you can do anything else. So we're going to be talking all about pens. I do also want to mention that I am by no means an expert. I don't consider myself an expert on fountain pens. I have been using them for several years, but I could be wrong, and I appreciate any kind of feedback, criticisms, or commentary in the comments if you want to challenge me or add the correct information if I get it wrong. Yeah, just putting that out there. No expert, just giving my experience and what I have learned over the years of using fountain pens. With all that being said, let me get started with a brief history of a fountain pen. So fountain pens have been around since the 1800s, which is really cool. They're very old-timey, writing instrument. If you really want to call it that. I kind of consider them more of like an original writing instrument. They come in a very large range of styles, from small to large, different nib sizes, different body shapes, and we'll be getting into more of that throughout the video. But let me talk about the anatomy of a fountain pen. So I'm going to use a Jinhao 82 for this because it is the easiest pen for me to kind of diagnose it for you guys. So we have the body of the fountain pen is this section here. So this section here. And we have the cap. So the cap usually unscrews or unsnaps from the pen, and this would be considered the cap. You have two finials, so you have an end finial and then a top finial. And on some pens, these are interchangeable, like the Jinhao 82s. I could pull off both end finials and change them out to whatever color I want, which I made a whole video about that if you're interested. But that is basically the generic outline of anatomy. You also have the pen clip, which is not present on every fountain pen. You have the grip section, which can be various materials. So you can have really smooth acrylic grip sections. You can have textured grip sections, metal grip sections, things like that. You have the nib itself, and then you have either a cartridge converter, a vacuum fill, eyedropper fill, or piston fill, which that will depend on the pen again, and we'll get more into that in a second when we go over filling mechanisms. But that is your generic anatomy of a pen. Think about if you were in grade school, you took apart your pen while you were in class taking notes, your Bic ballpoint pen, you just deconstructed that bad boy and kept reconstructing him during class. This is kind of like what a fountain pen is for a more expensive pen, I guess. It's not going to be 80 cents for a fountain pen. But now let's go over filling mechanisms. So like I just mentioned, we have some that are called cartridge converters. So they have a little piece of plastic, usually with a turn knob on the end, that you stick into the pen. And these can vary. So this one is a push in. I'm not going to pull it out because it is inked up, but I will show you one that is not inked. This is a 𝗦𝗵�cie𝗺𝗁𝗍𝗄. So this one has a converter, and that's what this is here. And essentially you would leave it pushed down like this, put this end into the ink, and then twist, and as the plunger moves up, the ink will fill into the converter. I'm not going to get behind the science of this. If you're really curious, you could use Wikipedia, Google, to your heart's desire to see how it pulls up the ink and all that kind of stuff. So that is a cartridge converter filling mechanism. There is also cartridges, which are commonly used in pens like Pilot, Sailor, 𝗍𝗃𝗁. They have international standard cartridges now. It just depends on the pen's, filling mechanism again. So for a Pilot pen, when you initially purchase one, you can get something like this, which is a different kind of cartridge converter. This is a sack fill. So you squish this and ink pulls into it. I'm not going to squish it because, again, there is ink in this one. But I'm also going to show you what a cartridge would look like. And cartridges typically come in a box, or they come with your pen when you initially get it. So most companies will provide a cartridge like this for the pen or a converter, depending on the brand. When you initially buy a pen, you will get either a black or blue cartridge typically, and this is what it is. So it is a tiny tube of plastic, tiny plastic tube filled with ink, and it is full. You would stick this end into the pen, and usually there's like a click, or you'll feel a little pop or some kind of like pressure release, and then the ink will start flowing into the pen. These are great for traveling. They're great for no mess. They're really nifty, and that they have a lot of capabilities to do with them. Like it's a lot easier to carry these than a bottle of ink, I guess is my point, and it's a lot easier to change the ink in your pen with one of these than with a bottle of ink. However, they are limited in colors, and you are sometimes limited to brand. So for instance, this is a Pilot cartridge. This will only go in Pilot pens. It won't go in any other kind of pen. If you wanted the ink inside of this, you would have to take a syringe and put it into something else, which can be kind of a hassle. So it depends on, again, what colors you like to write with, and then also what brand of pen you're using. Sailor is another one that I believe only Sailor cartridges fit into Sailor pens, but there are also cartridges like the 𝗂𝗏𝗁 cartridges that are international standard, and they can fit in most of the international standard cartridge taking pens. Okay, so that's cartridges. Then we also have eyedroppers. And I recently shared this in a video. This is my very first eyedropper pen. This is an Opus 88. The way this works is you would unscrew the nib section here and then literally take a dropper and drop the ink into the barrel of this pen. It holds probably the most ink out of any of the pens, and is a bit more high maintenance, I would say, with filling, because you have to use other tools besides just the pen and ink. I do think that eyedropper pens are really nifty, and you can get some pretty inexpensive ones off of like Amazon if you're really curious on testing something like this out. And then the last filling mechanism I'm going to be talking about today is piston. And this is a TWSBI Eco Rose Gold in Smoke, and the piston is here. So this knob turns and moves up and down inside here to fill this whole thing with an ink, So this would be considered the ink reservoir for this pen. And I lied, I do have one more filling mechanism that I want to talk about, and that is the vacuum fill. This isn't common in a whole lot of pens, but if you go for something like a TWSBI VAC 700 or this pen, which is the Pilot Custom A23, it will have a plunger system. So you would unscrew this back piece, pull it all the way out, stick the nib into the ink, and plunge the back piece down, and that vacuum of air pulls the ink into the barrel or the ink reservoir. They are very great. They hold a lot of ink, but I do find that these are very challenging to keep maintenance on in terms of cleaning. So again, we'll get to more on that in a minute, but cleaning pens is another really big part of fountain pens. Now let's talk about nibs. So there are usually two types of nibs that are most common on the market, and that is a steel nib and then a gold nib. So steel nibs are really common on beginner fountain pens. So this is a Pilot Kakuno. It has a steel nib, and it has a very cute steel nib because it's got a little happy face on it. And then you have things like the 𝗦𝗵𝟐Safari, which also has a steel nib, and these are really great reliable writers as well. Then you have things that are a bit more expensive that have gold nibs. So over here I have a Pilot Vanishing Point, which has a much higher price range because the nib is 18 karat gold. You could also say the same thing for a Platinum 3776. This has a 14 karat gold nib. The difference in the nibs comes down to writing experience. For a beginner, I highly recommend starting with a steel nibbed pen. And honestly, probably the cheapest steel nib pen you can find. And that is because you may not even like the writing experience of ink flow to paper or anything like that. So if you're spending your money, I want you to spend it on something that's going to be very reasonably priced versus something that's going to be over $100. I also want to say that sometimes steel nibs are not the color of steel. So this again is that Eco Rose Gold, and the nib is a rose gold color, but it is a steel nib. Last thing about steel versus gold nibs I want to talk about is the flex. So a lot of times when you're using a fountain pen, you may get a different line variation depending on how hard you push on the pen. Think of it like a brush pen, if you will, except it's not going to have that thick of a line variation unless you specifically go out for a pen like that. So a steel nib is going to be much stiffer. It's not going to flex when you push on it, but when you use a gold nib, there is a bit more of a give, so it can create that line variation. The tines of the nib will separate. For example, this is a pen that has a flex nib on it. You can see the difference in the nib. It has a bit of like a wing situation going on here. So when I push on the nib, it flexes a lot more on the page. This can cause a greater line variation, but this is a specifically ground or specifically made nib to be a flex. Which brings me to the next section I want to talk about, and that is different nib sizes and nib grinds. So there are lots of different nib sizes out there. I would say the main ones are going to be extra fine, fine, medium, and broad. Those are pretty standard across all pens. If you are getting a pen for the very first time, I highly recommend just starting with a fine. And that's because even if you like a really extra fine line, sometimes the extra fine nibs on fountain pens can be a little scratchy. So if you start with a fine, you can see, okay, I really like the writing experience, and then move to the extra fine after that and really see if it's something you really want or if you prefer the finer line. There are also specialty ground nibs, again, like that flex. There's journaler, architect, medium italic. There's so many different grinds for nibs that you could have a different nib grind for every single pen in your collection if you wanted. I do again recommend for a beginner, just start with your basics, extra fine, fine, medium, and broad. If you like a finer line, I would start with fine before you go to extra fine. And if you like a broader line, I think you'd be safe with a medium before you start with a broad. Also, there are different nib widths, like line widths from a nib depending on the maker of the pen. So if you have something that's more of a Western pen, so either made in Europe or Germany or anything like that, it's going to have a broader line. And then if you have a pen that is more Japanese, like a pilot or a sailor, then you're going to have a finer line. I don't know why it's like that. I don't think the nib sizes are standardized across all pens. I just have found through my experience that a Western brand pen is going to have a thicker nib or a thicker nib line, and then a more Japanese style pen is going to have a thinner nibbed line. I hope that makes sense. Now let's talk about pen body sizes. So this is something I don't really see a lot when talking about beginner fountain pens, and that is the size of the pen when you go to purchase. So depending on the size of your hands, pens will feel a little bit different. So I'm going to just use an example here of my 𝗏𝗏𝗏. So this is a classic gel pen in the, I guess, stationery world. This is a special edition one. That's why it looks all flowery. But this is basically the size of your standard pen. So when I hold this, it's going to sit a certain way in my hand and feel comfortable or uncomfortable. And personal preference is really what this comes down to. I prefer the, I guess, weight of the pen to be primarily sitting on the, I don't know, cushion of my hand right here. I don't really know what anatomy of my hand this is, but I prefer to sit like this. I hold my pen on my middle finger, sometimes on my ring finger, but most of the time on my middle finger, and I pinch the grip section like this. So depending on how you hold the pen, you can see what kind of fountain pen may work best for you. Honestly, when ordering a fountain pen online, you have no way of knowing what it's going to feel like in hand. So that's going to be kind of the scariest part of ordering a fountain pen if you don't do it in person. If you have a pen shop near you or you go to a pen show, highly recommend holding a bunch of pens, seeing what works well in your hand, what feels comfortable. A lot of times those places will have a writing pad. You can test out the writing experience with that pen. I definitely think that's great if you want to try this, especially for gold nibbed pen or a higher price point pen. But I do want to talk about pocket pens. So this is a Kaweco Sport. It is a very tiny pen. So when I uncap this, this is the size of the pen. This is it. It's tiny. So when I hold this in my hand, as you can see, it is very short. This would not be very comfortable for me to write with on a long-term basis because it's very short. I have to kind of like squish my hand to feel comfortable to write with it. But if I post it or add the cap on the back, it creates it to be a almost full-sized pen. Not quite as long as, again, that gel pen, but it is still a very reasonably sized pen for my hands. If you have really large hands, something like this would probably not be a good choice. But on the opposite end of that, if you have really small hands and you get something like this, which is a Leonardo Memento Zero Grande 2.0, this is a massive pen. This may be really intimidating to hold, especially if you needed to post it, which makes it a very, very large pen. And here again is a gel pen to kind of compare it to. So pen size definitely makes a difference in hand of what it feels like holding it. And again, the only real way you can test this is if you do it in person. However, I will say, look up whatever pen you're interested in on YouTube. There's most likely a review or somebody holding that pen, and you can see what it looks like in their hands and how they write with it, and you may get a better idea of what the pen size actually is. There's nothing worse than going in for a pen online that you think is really pretty or really great and then receiving it and finding out that it's tiny or that it's massive and you may not even be able to use it, in which case return or sell. Okay, now let's talk about the miscellaneous parts of pens that may make a difference to you or may not make a difference to you. So let's talk about posting. Posting is essentially where you take the end of the pen and the cap and you put them together. So this is a posted pen. This is a Platinum Preppy. And the way I see this is some people like to have a cap that posts onto the back of the pen because this helps, one, not lose your cap, and two, add weight to the back of the pen, or three, just aesthetically pleasing to look at. I don't know, this is kind of nice. For a plastic pen or a very inexpensive pen, posting them usually isn't a problem because it doesn't add that much weight, but it may add a bunch of length, which is something you don't want. So for me personally, like the 𝗦𝗵ici 𝗺𝗵𝗁 I mentioned, posting this pen is really long. This pen becomes very long when it is posted. So I prefer to have it unposted to write with. Also, I do want to talk about the different cap section, like the how the cap goes on, I guess. I don't really know the proper terminology for that. But you have snap caps that just, you snap them together like this. You also have caps that screw. And I feel like fountain pens typically have a screw cap, but some have the snap cap. Depending on the pen, that is how the pen will seal, and it may wear out over time, depending again on the quality of the pen. I also want to talk about pen weight a little bit. You can weigh the pen before you ink it up, or again, look at those review videos on YouTube. A lot of the bigger review channels have a scale and will weigh the pen. You can kind of gauge to see how heavy it is, or even just see, okay, this pen is much heavier than the other pen that I was looking at. Maybe I should go with the lighter version, whatever. Pen weight is really per preference, and it's kind of like one of those little nerdy aspects of this hobby, if you will. It's not super important for a beginner, but it may matter to you depending on how much weight you like on your hand, and if you have any conditions that maybe holding something heavy in your hand for a longer amount of time may cause you problems, like carpal tunnel or any kind of arthritis, anything like that. Okay, now let's talk about maintenance. So maintenance is probably the biggest part of fountain pens. I'm not going to be cleaning any pens in this video. I'm going to have a separate video about cleaning pens, but I do want to talk again just about general maintenance. You don't want to have pens with ink in them that are going unused for a long amount of time. It does, again, depend on the pen. It's very unique, individual to each pen. But in my experience, no matter what pen I have, if I leave it inked up and I'm not using it, I end up having dried ink inside the pen, and it creates a larger problem when I go to clean the pen. I also want to say that With maintenance, you want to make sure you're taking care of your pens. These are kind of an investment. Even the more affordable ones are still an investment. You can use them over and over and over again for years. Some people like to use them as throwaway pens. I personally do not. So maintenance on the pen is important. And by maintenance, again, taking care of it as in like not just treating it with disrespect, but also keeping it clean, and then also making sure that you're watching for things like rust or even kinds of oils or grease kind of getting in places that it shouldn't be. And again, it's very individual to each pen, and I think you'd probably know when something is going wrong with your pen because it's not going to feel the same when you write with it. I also want to talk about maintenance for the nibs. So different nibs require different maintenance. And all I mean by that is just paying attention to the writing experience. If you get a pen initially and it's not writing the way you think it should write or the way you've written with it at like a pen show or at another store, definitely reach out to the retailer and also maybe do your own research on nibs and see if something is really common with that nib. And on that note, I want to talk about feedback. So certain nibs have something called feedback. And to me, feedback is basically when you write with the pen, it's going to have a almost pencil-like feel on the paper. And paper can make a big difference when it comes to feedback. If you have a very smooth paper, you're not going to have as much feedback versus if you have a bit more of a toothy paper, you will have more feedback. Pens that I find to be the most common with feedback are Sailor pens. This is a Sailor Compass 1911. This is a starter pen from Sailor. This pen costs about $30 to $40. So Sailor nibs, in my experience, have feedback. So when you write with it, it's going to have a pencil-like feel, and it may make a bit more sound when you write with it on the paper. It is by no means a problem for the nib or the pen. It's just a personal preference on if you like feedback or not. Some people like really smooth nibs to where they don't make any sound, where it's like gliding on the page. I'm one of those people. I prefer those types of pens, and to me, Pilot nibs are really great at having a very smooth writing experience. Okay, and then the last thing I want to talk about fountain pen basics for pens is price ranges and kind of dupes as well. So for a beginner, I highly recommend either one of these two pens. So this is again a Platinum Preppy. This pen retails for roughly $5 to $7 US. They are widely available from multiple pen retailers, and they have several different nib sizes to choose from. Other than that, I highly recommend the Pilot Kakuno. So when I got started with fountain pens, the Pilot Kakunos did not exist, but I highly recommend them. They are workhorses, they are very easy to use, and with the happy face nib, it just makes you kind of happy when you look at it, when you write with it. I do want to say that both of these are plastic pens though. So if you are, I guess, a bit strong-handed and you force things to screw together, you may crack one of these pens, in which case I would probably recommend something that's a little bit more sturdy, and I would say, well, either the Pilot Metropolitan or even something like a TWSBI Eco. So these two pens are a bit more expensive, and I'll get to that in a second. So again, Platinum Preppy would probably be the first one I tell you to get because it's $5 to $7, and they have a range of nib sizes, and it comes with the cartridge inside, and you can just test it out and see how you feel. And then Kakuno would be my second choice, and this is roughly $12 to $15 US, again, because you have a few different nib sizes to choose from, and they are just really good at beginner, like hand holding, if you will. Like they just feel really nice in the hand. These two pens are a bit more expensive. These range from $25 to $40 depending on which ones you get. The ones with the specialty metals like this rose gold are going to be more expensive, but these ones are a bit sturdier in the plastic. They're a bit heavier, and they may hold up a little bit better, and they also again have a range of nib sizes. The only downside if you get the TWSBI is you have to get a bottle of ink. This does not have a cartridge, so you would have to get a bottle of ink with this to fill it up. So if you're not ready to venture into the ink bottle world, probably start with one of the cartridge pens like these three here. So again, Preppy, Kakuno, or Pilot Metropolitan. Also, I highly recommend the 𝗏𝗏 pens. So they have so many different sizes. And the reason I really recommend the 𝗏𝗏 pens is because they are incredibly inexpensive, but they also are dupe bodies for more expensive fountain pens. So this one is the 82 model, and this is a dupe size for both the Pelikan M200 and also the Sailor Pro Gear Slim. So the Pelikan M200 is roughly a $200 pen, and then the Sailor Pro Gear Slim is again $250 pen. I think this would be really nice to try out before you buy something like that, so you can see if the pen body even works for you. However, the nib experience is not going to compare to either of those pens, which again goes back to that gold versus steel kind of situation. The gold nibs are going to have a much smoother writing experience, so I highly recommend starting with steel and then working your way up to gold, just so you can appreciate I guess the beginnings of steel pens before you just splurge on a gold nibbed one. But yeah, definitely check out 𝗏𝗏 pens. They have several different models that hold different dupes for other pens. So like this one again is the Sailor Pro Gear Slim. Here is a 𝗏𝗏 80. This is the same as a 𝗏𝗵 2000. So they're really great dupes for pens that are much more expensive. I also quickly want to mention with the 𝗦𝗵cie 𝗺𝗵, I don't think I talked about this, but the grip section is specifically designed to hold it a certain way. So this is probably back to the pen bodies or pen anatomies. So certain grip sections have different place points where you put your hand. So like this one is literally meant you put one finger here, and you rest it on your middle finger, which this works for me because this is naturally how I hold a pen. But if you have a different grip on a pen or a different writing style, this may be very uncomfortable for you, and this little grip section may be really annoying to write with. This is also common on the 𝗬𝘃𝗁𝐴 𝑒𝑐𝑜-T. I believe it has a grip section similar to this. Okay, I think I'm going to leave the video off here. I've covered pretty much every topic I wanted to talk about for pens specifically. I will have separate videos when it comes to cleaning and maintenance, paper, and then also ink. So stay tuned for those. But if you have any questions about pens themselves, if you're curious about, your very first fountain pen or something you haven't really noticed about your fountain pens that you've been using, definitely chat about it down in the comments. Either I will comment back or somebody else from this lovely fountain pen community may help you out as well. And that is another thing before I end the video. Join either like a fountain pen Facebook group, or maybe if you have a fountain pen group in your area that y'all meet in person, or again, like a pen shop, go talk to somebody who's used a fountain pen and they can give you their personal experience on it as well. Or you can just go down the whole of YouTube and watch lots and lots of pen videos and, make your judgments there too. But anyways, I want to thank you so much for watching, for joining me here today. Stay tuned for those other beginner fountain pen videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.